Hi, everyone. Welcome to the third webinar in this series. So I'm moderating this. I was hoping to be co-moderating it with Valeria Betancourt. Unfortunately, she's not feeling well today and so is not joining us. So I'll be taking the lead at least at first, but as with all of these things, it's a team effort. So thank you, Amrita, TT, and I don't know if Bruno's joined yet, but for all the help in the administration here. Looking at the chat, so hang on, I'll post here. We have another group of 5 discussants today. Oh, hang on.
I can post it. You can start speaking. I'll get it.
Okay. Who'll be taking us through a number of non-papers and responses to the Elements paper that was published a while back. And as with some of the previous webinars, as I'm sure many of you were joining us for those, we'll hear first from those speakers, and then we'll have some discussion touching on some of the different issues that they've raised in those papers. And so please, while you're listening to our speakers, be thinking of any questions you might have, or any comments, or any insights that you might want to share later in the call, because it'd be great to hear from as many people as possible in this. So the speakers that we have today, just by way of introduction, and let me just look in the list here to make sure that they're all with us. Well, we have the list is we have William Lee, who's the Internet Governance Lead with the Australian Government, presenting on the Australian Government's WSIS+20 non-paper. He was running a little late, so hopefully he'll be able to join in the next few minutes. We have Poncelet Ileleji, who is representing the national and regional initiatives, who collectively submitted a position on the WSIS+20 and Internet governance beyond 2025. We have Nandini Chami, who's with IT for Change and presenting on the Global Digital Justice Forum's submission and non-paper on WSIS, and also their submission in response to the Elements paper. We have Isabelle Lois from the Swiss government, although perhaps I'm not sure if she or
Isabelle is there.
Jorge.
Isabelle is there. Chris,
Isabelle,
just a question.
Yes.
Did you send the correct link to William? I did send it to Nandita right now.
That's a good question, and I'll make sure
I will mail it to him.
Okay. Okay, and sorry, the 5th speaker that we have is Desiree Miloshevic, who is presenting on the RIPE NCC's submission in regard to the Elements paper. So I don't know if Will is in the room just yet. So I would suggest then that, Poncelet, we start with you, if that's okay, and you're happy to take us through the NRIs submission.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chris. Good afternoon, everybody, from my base in the Gambia to this webinar session. And I will start by saying that within the Elements paper, which reflects on the importance of the multi-stakeholder model and the strengthening of the IGF and the commitments to digital inclusion, technical collaboration, and especially with the integration of new frameworks to advance global internet governance in a very coordinated and actionable way. What NRIs have come up with is, one, to our shared commitment in terms of open and free and global, inclusive and interoperable internet to achieve the vision we underline. And some of these visions are based on our the NRI's core principles in terms of reinforcing the multi-stakeholder model. And when we look at reinforcing the multi-stakeholder model, we also have to remember that the NRIs consist of national and regional internet governance initiatives. And it is very important that within that strength, it has to take a bottom-top approach, whereby national internet governance initiatives are very much strengthened to reflect the global context. It's not led by government or led by civil society alone. It has to include the whole model of what we envision within the definition of internet governance. And considering that, NRIs believe that we have to secure a permanent mandate for the Internet Governance Forum. And this permanent mandate makes it possible for the NRIs to operate well, and it will also strengthen the secretariat of the Internet Governance Forum to be able to deliver well to national and regional contexts. And for me, personally, when I look at the NRI statement, you'll discover that right now we still have ongoing internet governance forums taking place in certain countries. And if we have had a very strong permanent mandate for the Internet Governance Forum, all the national and regional internet governance initiatives should have taken place before the global, so that the views coming from national and regional will now reflect on the global. In some cases now, as we are seeing, is vice versa. We now have the global forum that has taken place since June, and we still have some national initiatives taking place. We also believe in the recognizing NRIs as a core pillar for the Global Internet Governance Forum, because that recognition as of the NRIs being a core pillar is very important, because you are getting that inclusive, global inclusiveness we talked about in our shared commitment, because you are reflecting the views from the bottom, from grassroots organizations, governments who might not really have their voices heard within the global context, and it moves on to regional, whether it's within Eurodig or the African continent or Latin America. We get those views. So it is very important we recognize that the voices of all is in recognizing the NRIs as a core pillar. Again, we have to ensure technological neutrality in internet governance, and the long-term implications of emerging and future digital technologies remain uncertain. We now see all the discussions around artificial intelligence, and it's very important that we ensure that technological neutrality, and that comes with our shared commitment in interoperability of the internet. So overall, when I look at these 4 commitments I stated from the beginning, reinforcing the multi-stakeholder approach, securing a permanent mandate for the Internet Governance Forum, recognizing NRIs as a core pillar of global internet governance, and the 4th one, which is ensuring technological neutrality in internet governance, we believe that within this, our shared vision, following the 4 principles I stated, we are very much in alignment with the element paper of the WSIS+20. I stop here for now. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Poncelet. That was a very useful summary of the document, and I think we will hear likely a number of other of our speakers talking about the need to strengthen NRIs and strengthen their integration into other elements of the WSIS architecture. We do have William Lee from Australia here now with us, so I'm going to throw back to him. I think this was one of the first sort of non-papers that came through in this round of the WSIS+20 review process, and I myself played a very small part in the multi-stakeholder consultations that the Australian government conducted in developing it. So I think it was a really interesting and positive approach that they had with that. And it's come out with is a very ambitious and concrete document. So we'll please walk us through it, at least the highlights. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Chris, and apologies for some technical challenges on my end that delayed me. And thanks very much for giving me the opportunity to present some of Australia's ideas. I will see if I can put some slides up, but I will, in the interest of time, get started. I think, as you mentioned, Australia came out with a non-paper relatively early in the process, and really did so to recognizing the fact that the WSIS is a really ambitious digital development and digital transformation agenda. So the non-paper that we put out attempted to look at the evidence base for a range of digital issues, whether that was reducing duplication, improving governance, universal and meaningful connectivity, how we engage different stakeholder groups, how we deal with some of the really topical content challenges that are popping up in the online and the digital environment, how we support the development of skills and media literacy, and how we tackle some of the emerging technologies such as AI, quantum, blockchain, how we support digital public infrastructure, and of course, how we continue to grow and strengthen the multi-stakeholder model of internet governance, including the IGF. The non-paper that we pulled together, I guess, tried to look at some ideas for each one of these areas. And we ended up with about 55 or so ideas in total, really looking collectively as to how can WSIS+20 deliver a positive, proactive, and action-orientated agenda. We published this about 6 to 8 weeks ago ahead of the IGF in Oslo, and we've had some really good feedback, and I hope it has started some really good conversations, which was the entire, I guess, purpose of our document, was to get people thinking about what this WSIS+20 process might be able to deliver. In the interest of time for today, what I'll do is really just focus in on a couple of those topics. But before I do, I really wanted to kind of think of WSIS as, I guess, an architecture or as a framework, and really focus in on what that might look like first, because I think where we are with the WSIS is that it is that overarching governance and normative framework that really supports all of the digital transformation and digital development objectives as we go through. We really asked kind of some fundamental questions. What do we have that works? What do we need to improve upon or change? And as I guess a third question, how can we really support a governance and digital framework environment that enables that? And where we got to, hopefully you can see the diagram on the screen, was this diagram here, really looking at the strength of the 11 action lines, really looking at the strength of multi-stakeholderism, but recognizing that perhaps we could do some more work within that multi-stakeholder environment to address some of those emerging challenges and emerging technologies. Kind of really focusing in on internet governance now, because I know that's obviously a real focus for the working group on strategy. I think we had a couple of ideas. The first was around the permanency of the IGF. And I think we've heard from a number of other stakeholders talking about the IGF, that there's an opportunity through WSIS+20 to make that permanent. So that, I think, is a really important opportunity that we see as well. The second was around rebranding. And from our perspective, there is an opportunity to consider a rebrand from the IGF. I think not necessarily to change how the IGF works or to suggest that we need to be doing necessarily anything different, but just recognizing that perhaps using different language, language that is more widely understood by a range of governments, by a range of industry and other stakeholders, to understand how this really important multi-stakeholder forum can fit in to their work and their goals, could actually improve the IGF and the outcomes that we can derive from it. So we were really open to the idea of perhaps a name change or some adjustments to the marketing, I suppose, of the IGF to support that. We also had some questions around kind of structural reform of the IGF structure, whether that was a stronger role for the MAG in terms of the work that it does. But also having, and I think we heard similarly to colleagues from the EU last week, having an ambassador or an institutional advocate, someone working within the system to really elevate the work that the IGF does as an ecosystem, not only the global IGF, but also the national and the regional initiatives as well, and to support that within the broader UN system and the broader WSIS framework to deliver on those digital development objectives. We also looked at the question of, well, if we're going to make the IGF permanent, how do we keep it up to date? And I think some of the opportunities there were around review mechanisms. We felt that a self-review mechanism, so in other words, the community owning the mandate of the IGF was really, really important. But also recognize that there needed to be a role for member states, given the UN nature of the IGF process, and that could be brought into the CSTD as a mechanism for that oversight. But really shifting the IGF's mandate from one that is controlled directly by member states through a UN resolution to one that is actually controlled by the community and is therefore more responsive to needs. We also had some other ideas about how we maybe push for an IGF that's delivering more meaningful outputs. And by that, I don't necessarily mean decisions, but I do really mean focusing on what are the outputs, and I guess sparking a cycle of conversation from local IGFs through to regional IGFs, through to the global IGF, and then back around, so that we do get those local, regional, global perspectives on issues. And we also improve the participation and inclusiveness of the process, something that perhaps is a little bit lacking at the moment. I guess the other question in terms of the internet governance sphere of our non-paper was around funding. And we really pushed here to put some quite provocative ideas around funding to support people to think about how we make this a sustainable mechanism. In the non-paper, we suggest that there should be ongoing voluntary contributions, as there is now, that we should have a limited annual contribution from the UN budget, and the value of that is really to provide a base level of secretariat support to allow the IGF to deliver each year on the commitments that it makes. And then as a third idea, considering secondments from the community into that secretariat to bring in some of the technical and specialized expertise that this community could take real value from, whether that's marketing, whether that's community outreach, whether that's fundraising, whether that's web development. We know as a community we have all of these skills, so why not put us as a community in the driving seat as much as our permanent secretariat. We also felt that there needed to be a support for enhanced participation from developing countries, and that we should be looking at a financing mechanism that supports that, not only from governments, but from all parts of the stakeholder community. And then finally, I think to no surprise, the integration of the national and regional initiatives was a real priority for us, and something that we felt was long overdue. And then finally, I guess to kind of pull back from the IGF specifically, to kind of maybe talk a little bit about some of the more nebulous internet governance matters. The first was around the adoption of best practice and the Sao Paulo multi-stakeholder guidelines being a really key driver of that, a real key driver of best practice, and something that WSIS+20 can promote and take forward across all of the various fora that we see. The second was around, as I mentioned before, improved participation and representation from all countries and stakeholders. And I think that's something we've heard not only from different regions, not only from stakeholders in different parts of the community, but I think for everyone, the more voices we can get into the process, whether that's youth voices, whether that's voices of vulnerable groups, whether that's voices of countries in the global south, or whether that's voices that might not otherwise be heard, finding ways to really bring in those communities is really important. And then I guess as a final point, bridging the gap between multi-stakeholderism and multilateralism. We had an idea in the non-paper for a technical liaison office. Basically, the idea being that the technical community should interface more with governments and multilateralism to be able to provide directly into the decision-making processes the technical expertise and the technical advice that's needed. And likewise, for governments and other multilateral stakeholders to be able to share areas that they want to see considered by the technical institutions. I'll pause there. There's a lot in our non-paper, as I said, but I think that's a fairly good snapshot of some of the things that we've been thinking about in the internet space. Thanks very much, Chris.
Thanks, Will. That's brilliant. And sorry, I realize, as you said, there's a lot there, and compressing it into 6 minutes is tough. But hopefully we can get through these, and then because I'm very curious to hear if people on the call have views and reactions to some of the ideas that you talked about and that are in that non-paper. So to the next speaker, which is Nandini Chami. So Nandini, welcome. And so speaking a bit about the Global Digital Justice Forum's non-paper and in response to the Elements paper. So Nandini, please.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to share our position and also learn from everyone's views on this call. As many of you may know, the Global Digital Justice Forum is a civil society coalition of organizations from across the globe who are committed to returning digital power to people and furthering a just, equitable and development-oriented digital paradigm. In preparation towards this WSIS review process, the forum had come out with a 4-point agenda, which was called the Digital Justice Call to Action, where we stressed the aspects of ensuring that the human rights framework is adequate to meeting the challenges of the digital paradigm, reclaiming the internet as a global communication commons, building a just international economic order, and ensuring ecological sustainability and the rights of future generations as our 4 key priorities. What I would like to discuss today is about how, building on this 4-point agenda, we just inputted into the Elements paper consultation, drawing attention to what we feel are certain absences or aspects that are not stressed adequately. And we have 5 points in this regard. So firstly, we feel that the mention of human rights, it needs to be far stronger. And as Para 22 of the Global Digital Compact has mentioned, it is important to look at human rights protection all across the technology lifecycle and not just look at translating all offline rights online. So we feel that in this regard, it is important to underscore a specific recognition of the state obligation to protect against human rights abuses of their digital businesses in global cross-border value chains, particularly data and value chains. So this is one aspect we thought the Elements paper could have stressed more. The second agenda is about a new gender deal in WSIS+20, where we not only look at the issue of addressing technology-mediated gender-based violence, but look at a positive agenda for furthering gender equality through mainstreaming gender effectively in each of the action line implementations, setting adequate targets, and also looking at the financing routes. The third point was that instead of framing the issue of information integrity in those words, it's important to move to an epistemic rights framing where we are able to stress that all citizens must have access to reliable information and knowledge in the online public sphere, and we need disclosure guidelines for AI models operating in platform environments. The fourth issue is that when we look at building digital public infrastructure and the data and AI capabilities of the majority world, in the financing routes that we explore, it's critical to emphasize public financing and also build on proposals such as the digital development tax and solidarity levies that have been proposed in context such as climate change action. Finally, we felt that in order to take forward the agenda of data and AI governance as a WSIS priority and for integrated implementation of the WSIS and GDC actions, it would be crucial to have a mandate through the ECOSOC for CSTD to have a standing agenda at the annual review of the WSIS to discuss implementation of data and AI governance, and the global data on AI governance must also synchronously happen with this. Finally, coming to how we see the IGF's future, we also believe that it's critical to renew the mandate of the IGF. And in order for the IGF to emerge as a truly inclusive platform for knowledge sharing, dialogue, and debate on all aspects of digital governance, dedicated funding is important, and only this will ensure equitable participation from stakeholder constituencies in developing countries. We think that in line with the Net Mundial +10 principles, to ensure that we don't implement checkbox multi-stakeholderism, but truly inclusive and meaningful representation where civil society can demand accountability through IGF dialogues from powerful actors. It would be important to rethink about how we select proposals and what formats we emphasize so that minority views and actual debates can have center stage at the IGF. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Nandini. I'm going to keep moving quickly here just so we get through this first round and can then have some more discussion. So next, I'd like to turn to Isabelle Lois from the Swiss government. Isabelle, if you're here
Hi.
online.
Yes.
Hi. So yeah, the Swiss, another sort of early one out of the gates with a non-paper for provoking discussion. And so yeah, please, Isabelle, walk us through some of the key points there.
Thank you, Chris. Hi, everyone. I hope you're hearing me well. Maybe just before I go into what we are suggesting or proposing in the non-paper, I want to say a few words on how we wrote it and how we sort of came to this second version of the document that we have. So it's been a long process to get to this text. We've been doing consultations, meetings, bilaterals, dinners, and all of the above to try to get a feel of what the community thinks is important, is essential, cares about, considers for this WSIS+20 review. And so in the past 2 years, we've really compiled all of these discussions and sort of tried to bring them together. And then even when we wrote the sort of first iterations of this non-paper, we sent it out for consultation, and that's why we have now a second version. So I just wanted to start by saying it is, yes, a sort of a Swiss non-paper, if we can say it in that way, but it is much more than that. It reflects, I think, a lot of the positions of different members of the community, be it from government side, and I mean government as like-minded countries or European or Western countries, but also non-Western countries. A lot of Global South countries have also contributed in sharing positions and thoughts on what we've been writing. but it also has included a lot of positions from civil society or from the technical community. We've really tried to retake many of the points that we keep hearing in different meetings and put that into something a bit cohesive. So we're also happy to see that it has inspired a few other documents and positions and papers, so that's very good. But I think it's really the testament that it's not just our ideas, but it's really a collective set of work. So if it is something that you use, please consider it also yours and not just ours. So maybe that's just as a first point. Then on the paper itself, I think there's sort of, well, there's three parts. There's an introduction, sort of explaining what is WSIS+20, why is it important, why should we care, what's at stake. And then we have two parts. One is more on the content, so the what are we talking about? What are the issues that are relevant today? And there we have a few points on AI, data governance, digital divide, information integrity, and so on. So this is really the content. What could we include, or what should we discuss now during WSIS+20 review and then moving forward? But then the core ideas or the core elements of our non-paper really come in the how. So if we have all of these issues that are important that we need to address in a certain way, how are we going to address them? How is the architecture, the sort of WSIS family as we have it now, serving, responding to these issues, or how does it need to change to further work on it or to include the new themes that are relevant today? So I think that's really where we see the most sort of innovative proposals. And this is also something, if we're looking at the elements paper, where there's a lot on the what are we talking about, but less on the how are we going to form them. And this is, I think, where we're going to have the great discussion starting when we get the zero draft. Maybe on the how, I can go into a bit more detail. One of the core idea it is based on is thinking on the different agreements we've come to in the past years on digital issues. So one of them is, of course, the Global Digital Compact, which we adopted last year at the General Assembly. So it is very recent, and it shows really the political commitments on how are we wanting to deal with these new digital issues. What do we want to do on AI? What do we want to do on data governance and on different points? But also considering sort of how the world has changed in the past year. This is, I think, the best we can, or one of the best documents or texts we can get at on the content. Now we have to see how will this be implemented. And considering that the Global Digital Compact, but also the AI resolutions that we have had negotiated, I think in 2023 already, and a few other resolutions, there's less of an implementation mechanism. And so this is where we see the WSIS architecture with the CSTD, the IGF, UNGIS, WSIS Forum, and so many other aspects as an answer to implement all of these questions. So we see the Global Digital Compact as new political commitments that we've made, and then WSIS and its priority, its main themes, and its core documents as the way to sort of give an answer to it. So part of our proposal is a joint implementation of GDC and WSIS, so anchoring these new points, these new questions in the existing forum. And then we've looked at each aspect of this architecture. So if we're looking at UNGIS, which is overseeing sort of the day-to-day implementation of the WSIS action line, maybe the key members of UNGIS should, the core members of UNGIS should be extended to include new actors. And in this case, we're thinking about ODET in particular, but also OHCHR that are now doing so much more on digital issues and have a very important voice. So this is something where we could update UNGIS to reflect the new sort of realities of who in the UN system is doing the work. We also have proposals on adding a multi-stakeholder element to UNGIS. So sort of having maybe a committee or a group that could advise UNGIS on how to give strategic priorities and how to implement those different action lines. We have a proposal on a help desk that could propose or help a government or an actor, stakeholder, trying to navigate this huge field of different UN forums and systems and say, okay, I want to create policy in my country or in my region on AI or on digital infrastructure, where should I go, who should I ask, what do I need to consider? And this help desk could answer these questions and could give them some sort of feedback. So this is something that would be quite useful to be able to navigate this quite complicated system. We also have a few thoughts on the WSIS forum, which has served as really the platform to showcase what has been happening, how have we been implementing the action line so far. And this is really an important milestone, an important moment to look at what we have done in the past 20 years, which is a lot. There's still a lot to be done, but there is a lot of content that has been made. And so the WSIS forum should continue being the place where we can look at the action lines, look at how they're being implemented, look at what we need to do more on, without trying to take over or be sort of a second IGF, as they have very different purposes. We also have a few proposals on enhanced cooperation, which is an important theme, and it comes up also in the elements paper we've seen, where we suggest, instead of trying to redefine what enhanced cooperation means, as that's a very complicated and long discussion, implementing it where it is already sort of being done. And the CSTD is one of those places. The CSTD has this intergovernmental space where government can share best practices, where they can share the main issues that they're facing and how they are trying to find a solution, and then they can hear from other governments what they are doing and how they are answering those questions. So this is one of our proposals. Within the CSTD, we're also thinking about enhancing the multi-stakeholder elements of it. It already has a good basis, but we could do more. We could have more participation of other stakeholders within the CSTD, be it the plenary or the rest of the year. And then, of course, maybe very relevant for especially those who are listening today, we have a lot of thoughts and proposals on the IGF. So I can repeat many of the things that we heard from the Australian non-paper as well. Of course, a permanent mandate, something should be done about the funding. We're also thinking about a mix of core UN funding and voluntary contributions. We would like to see a better participation of underrepresented communities and also from government at the right level. For that, we're maybe suggesting to have a government track, or if we don't want to call it a track, a government space, as many governments struggle to justify why they should travel to the IGF because the role is maybe not as clear. And having one space where they will have a specific sort of seat at the table, then they can say, okay, I'm going there for that, and then they might be able to join for the rest of the festivities, if I can say it in that way. A few other points we have on the IGF, using the outcomes of the IGF in a more tangible way, be it the messages that they're short, concise, very useful, and maybe they should be retaken for the CSTD when it chooses its priority themes for the year, or it can be retaken within UNGIS to know how to orient the implementation of the action lines, as the IGF is really the place where we do the issue spotting, where we come up with the new questions and the new struggles that we're seeing within the digital sort of realm. So this is something that we really hope to have a better interconnectedness of the IGF within the rest of the system, but also to have the outcomes of the IGF be used within the rest of the system. And that also means highlighting everything that is being done intersessionally, I mean, the policy networks, the best practice forums, and using that work also within the rest of the system and not just having it as one IGF part. We also have a suggestion for rebranding, which is more about recognizing that the IGF is doing more than just strictly internet governance, but is covering so many more issues as a really recognition of the work that is really being done. And I think that's most of our proposal. I went a bit quickly, but I imagine that you've maybe heard us talk about it before. So I think most of this will already be familiar to some of you. I'm always happy to answer any questions. Chris, over to you once again.
Thank you, Isabelle. Well, as there's already some discussion in the chat here, some really interesting convergences and subtle divergences between the Swiss and the Australian papers. So it'd be interesting to dig into that a little later, and if either of you have reflections there, it'd be great to hear. But before we do that, we have one last speaker who we wanted to give an initial round to, and that's Desiree from the RIPE NCC. So Des, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chris, and good morning and afternoon, everyone. I'm the RIPE Community RIPE Cooperation Working Group co-chair, but today I'll be presenting the RIPE NCC response to the Elements paper. And the process, similarly to what Isabelle said and maybe others, it wasn't just a response to the questionnaire with the Elements paper. I think this road started way back with the GDC, where the technical community and the RIPE NCC is part of this global technical community, has really engaged in the process and actively made responses to GDC, but also the CSTD back in 2024, the survey on the progress report on the implementation of the outcomes of the WSIS. So that is really to say that having thought through that process, what WSIS represents, and this crucial opportunity of the WSIS+20, it all kick-started a way back. But we have done something which is called wrote a document called the key fact sheet, where is a call to action, and I just share it in the chat as well, which is more related how we see the process and because I think there's this opportunity that the WSIS+20 will provide this opportunity to reflect and to reinforce the foundational principles of the internet. It's open, distributed, and global interoperable architecture, which has enabled innovation and connectivity for billions of users. So we think it's important to safeguard these principles. And is also connected to the internet governance, which should, we think, be truly inclusive and better integrate and recognize these bottom-up processes. Moving on to the response of the Elements paper, we thought it was very important to look at the things that have been achieved across the over the last 2 decades, and that is certainly what many people have noticed: the scaled-up connectivity. And the real progress has been made. However, I think it also remains one of the biggest challenges, and that is to close the digital gap. I think we're a little bit tired of hearing it all the time, but it is really important. And I think there are a lot of suggestions being made from other non-papers as well, that are drawing our attention to many ways of closing this digital gap with community networks, with better usage of universal service, and so on. One more important element of this scaled-up connectivity, I think, is also the recognition that this is a collective effort, and that organizations like the ITF and ICANN and regional internet registries such as RIPE NCC and ARIN and LACNIC and APNIC and AFRINIC did really contribute and remain and help to ensure that this platform stays open and interoperable. So that cannot be forgotten. But looking over the last 2 decades as well, one of the important achievements we thought was the very recognition and understanding of the internet ecosystem. This process is, whether it's a framework of WSIS and the IGF that grew out of the came out from WSIS, is the one, it remains one of the most enduring institutional achievements. And we know that over time, it has grown into a vibrant and this year-round platform. And we also call in our key fact sheet paper for recognition of NRIs, of regional, sub-regional, national IGFs, and the whole family of the IGF networks, where the stakeholders work on strengthening the multi-stakeholder process of internet governance. So just to go back to the second advancement that we thought was relevant and where I actually started, what I wanted to say first is this recognition that about advancement of norms and rights in digital age. We have clearly seen that rights that are online should be respected as rights offline, and I think the WSIS and the IGF has brought further understanding and has brought this into many policy discussions on many levels and initiatives. But turning to the challenges of the zero draft, what we thought it should really address, as I said, firstly to address the digital divide that remains persistent, because we know despite the progress, it remains a challenge. But secondly, I think there are gaps in the follow-ups and in monitoring and in follow-up mechanisms. We also note that many member states have been slow to integrate some of the 11 or 17, depending how you count, action lines. The framework is really good and it's technology neutral, which is really a good thing. It is expandable, and we also think it should be somehow sharpened, perhaps, but it's wholesome and it is sufficient as it is. But in terms of the follow-up mechanism, particularly from participation of the Global South, something that's been already mentioned, is something where we need much clearer and kind of more accountable follow-up mechanisms to make the WSIS+20 work better. And thirdly, I would just mention that one of the important things I said earlier is the safeguarding the interoperability and the integrity of the global internet, because it's the backbone and of the digital transformation. So we really need to look at the activities that organizations I mentioned before, such as INCC also does, from IPv6 deployment, from securing the networks with RPKI protocols, and from and others in technical community who have been working with partners to strengthen the resilience of the network. So that is an important element going forward. That's, I think, there's a lot to say on, I think, that we agree with what's previously been said, and also to confirm that some of these non-papers have served, the UK, Swiss and Australian have served as an inspiration to get involved in the process. And I think there are plenty of good ideas. So the WSIS has given us so much to build on, and we ought to continue. And I think the real test now is to see whether we can strengthen these foundations to really deliver an inclusive and people-centered and sustainable digital future. But the technical community remains committed to do this collectively, and for it to be a collective endeavor. I'll stop here because I'm not sure if I'm over 5 minutes or not.
Okay, thank you very much, Desiree. Yeah, I think this has been a good coverage of all of the 5 non-papers, and so we still have a good 40 minutes or so here to have some discussion. So I invite people to put their hand up. I was thinking maybe first going back to Poncelet's initial presentation of the NRI submission. Wout Donatrus, you had some comments in the chat, but I was wondering if you'd like to bring those in terms of the sort of some thoughts about the integration and the relationship between NRI's intercessional work and the global IGF.
Yes, thank you, Chris. That was some of the things that Poncelet said that triggered it. For example, the secretary needs to be strengthened to be more supportive, but also that all regional and national, etc., need to have their meeting before the global IGF, which now this year was of course extremely early. But the fact is that that will lead to some sort of, of oversight, of a more of a dependency of your independence. And the same discussion is going for a while in the Dilemma Coalitions Group, coordination group, about recognition of our reports or recommendations, outcomes, that then would also come with more oversight of the work that actually being done by somehow independent bodies within the IGF. So I was wondering, Poncelet, you already answered in the chat, of course, but asking for more coordination does come with a little less independency, I think. So how is the discussion going? And secondly, also what we're also discussing is that outcomes should be more recognized, so they should be going up and input should be going, the outcomes should go down and the input should go up. That also puts a burden on the time that people have, and also a little bit on the topics you can address at the meeting. So how do you look at that, and how do you see the future, more or less family of within the IGF? Thanks.
Thank you, Wood. I think if you look at even the Australian presentation, and which I think reflects how the NRIs should work. When I was saying about strengthening of the IGF Secretariat is permanency, I'm looking at a situation whereby right now we have only like one person overseeing over 177 NRIs. Trying to see what happens there, trying to bring their voices to the global stage and stuff like that. So I didn't look at it, within various discussions we have had in our NRIs, even prior to this year's IGF and even the last one, you'll discover that there's this commitment on the NRIs, seeing their inputs from their national or regional initiatives to be really well heard. And if it's to be really well heard at the global stage, you need better coordination. It's not like dependency, because they are all individuals, and everyone at national level. I'll take Africa, for example. The needs in, say, if Ethiopia has their national IGF and the Gambia are totally different. But at the same time, when we come to our regional level, and that's why we have our School of Internet Governance Forum, you discover that we have a convergence of what are actually the needs in terms of the internet governance processes in Africa as a whole. So coming back to the structures, I still believe in this bottom-top approach, because at the end of the day, what fits into the global discourse comes from the national and regional initiatives, and we have to really hear their voices. And I believe that when those take place before the global IGF, we have better topics, because by that time the MAG will look at reports from, especially at the regional level, because when you look, there's a lot of good coordination that happens at the regional level to take inputs from various national NRIs, and it makes better for our MAG to look at, oh, this is what is coming from regions, basically also coming from national, and topics will reflect the needs, and I totally believe that all this, in a way, we might agree to disagree of how I put it, but in a way really justifies what has been put within the elements paper. I hope I tried to answer your question. Thank you.
Also, thank you very much for that. I'm sort of seeing that, well, so Henriette, I see you've got a few questions in the side here. I'm not sure if you're able to speak to those, but please do if you are able to. I was going to say the first question you have there, as you say, different views on how IGF management and governance, but I think relates quite well to this issue of how do we most effectively facilitate that bottom-up development and sort of process of cooperation. And that relates then to what sort of structures and processes we have at the global IGF level as well that can facilitate that. So looking, I don't know, maybe to Will or to Lois, Isabelle or others, if you have any thoughts on that. And as I say, Henriette, I see your other questions as well. So if you'd like to speak to those after Will, that would be great. Will, please.
Thanks, Chris. Happy to try and answer Henriette's first question, certainly from our perspective and building on the previous question as well. I think we see the opportunity for NRIs really to drive those bottom-up conversations around local priorities, local needs, local initiatives, and how they relate to the global conversation. I think we would all love a world where we had billions of dollars to fly everyone that wants to attend an NRI to the global IGF and get all of those perspectives. I think the reality is we just don't have those kinds of resources. But starting that cycle of conversation whereby we are hearing from the NRIs up and the global IGF is feeding back down in a fairly, in a structured way, but not in a way of oversight or control, more simply as channels of information, I think really important. And that goes to the question then about, well, how at the global level, what structures do we need? I think we see the opportunity for the MAG to really drive that agenda and really drive that coordination, working really closely with the Secretariat, being those voices from across the world to make sure that the global outputs are reflective of all of those local conversations, reflective of global priorities, reflective of global needs. And where we see the idea of an ambassador or an institutional advocate is really actually that interface with the wider UN system, and how does all of these conversations and all of these outputs then get actioned by the agencies and the entities that are actually responsible? And how do we get those agencies and entities to come and engage with our IGF process, and really bridging that multilateral, multi-stakeholder industry kind of triad? I think the point around the leadership panel is a really interesting one. And I have a lot of admiration for the work that the leadership panel has done. But I actually think a simpler governance structure is better in some respects. In this case, if you've got a really strong MAG, you've got a leadership role for this institution, and we've got a really strong Secretariat that's perhaps being supported by the community itself, then you actually end up with a really lean and efficient structure in our view. So those are just some thoughts on that question.
Brilliant. Thanks, Will. And obviously, Isabelle, you also mentioned in your hand going up, mentioned the evolution of UNGUS and the importance of that sort of linkage to other parts of the UN. So please jump in there.
Yes, thank you. And I think I can agree with many of the points that Will mentioned on sort of the role of the MAG and the NRIs and what they could and can do within the IGF. I think where we diverge is maybe more on the leadership panel, and this idea of having a single point of contact or having one person be ambassador for the IGF in that way. I see the appeal in it being a maybe easier or more lenient structure where you just have one person to coordinate with, but I think it will not be multi-stakeholder. Who are you choosing? Which stakeholder is representing the IGF? How can we make that decision? That would be one of the first questions that I would ask, and I think that's one of the key components of the IGF, of being the image of how a multi-stakeholder sort of community can come together and decide and represent the entire community is an important part. So I think that's one of the main issues I would see with it. And the other one is having just one person mean that you put a lot of pressure. Either the person is great and it's going wonderfully, or the person is not so great and then it's going terribly. Having a bigger group, as the leadership panel is now, you have different people who have different experiences, backgrounds, and who will be able to come up with what they can bring to sort of represent the IGF in the best way. And the importance of having more than just the MAG, as I'm seeing it, as we're seeing it, is to have a way to connect the community, everyone who's attending the IGF, with the UN Secretary General and the office there, because you would need to have someone at a higher level who is being able to discuss in those ways, and that is not something that the MAG can or probably should do. It is also way too big. It is too many voices and diverging opinions, and so having a smaller group is a better way to go. But reducing that group to just one person, I think, is too risky, and it would be a nightmare to choose someone who could truly represent all of the facets of what the IGF does and brings and all of that. But without going into more details, I see that there's a few other hands, so I might leave the rest for you.
All right, thanks, Isabelle. This is the kind of deep, intense argument we were looking for on these webinars. Desiree, please.
Thank you. I would just like to add that it seems like there is this question out there: should the IGF continue to diversify, or should it try to consolidate? And here I mean all the processes that are like satellites to the main annual IGF. Of course, there are challenges because the IGF remains strong, in my view, because of its bottom-up inclusivity. But this model alone actually struggles to address more strategic or structural needs. And to build these stronger links with governments and multilateral processes. We have now Net Mundial, who has given us some guidelines how to do that, but that has to be implemented. But to stay relevant, I think the IGF must combine this participatory foundations with stronger leadership. So we need this kind of institutional buckling up or more capacity, whether it's in the shape of MAG members that the Australian non-paper suggests, of having a really clear, accountable roles. I'm adding that because we currently don't know where accountability stops. Is it with MAG members? Is it with leadership panel? Is it with the IGF Secretariat? To enhance this institutional capacity, and we know there isn't funding just available everywhere to do all of that, so that we can represent it externally, and we need to do both, I think, in my view. And that is to really work on strengthening the IGF Secretariat as well, but making these linkages of what comes out of IGF more clear by combining them with UN agencies. And I do agree here that ANGES could have a much a better role of a coordinator, trying to shape this, because the outputs are not reaching out some of the multilateral processes. It has become clear that CSTD could be one of such places within the UN system, but it really needs an overhaul and mainstreaming. And I know it's a painful process, so we are calling for some Internet Governance Hackathon to look at all these issues in November this year. And this was just a short plug-in. So I'll stop here, see more discussion in the room. Thanks.
Okay, thanks very much, Desiree. Vat, I think if you wanted to speak about this, can I ask you just to be very brief, and then we'll move on to some other areas.
Yes, thanks, Chris, and I will. On the leadership panel, etc., where things, in my opinion, have not gone optimal in the past years is how to get the messages of the IGF across in different communities. And in my opinion, it takes people who become official liaisons. So who are a member of the MAG or within the MAG structure, who are able to bring in the issue of two issues from a specific community and go back with messages after the IGF cycle is over. And only then we will get more buy-in from different communities because they will become more dependent of what the IGF has as output. And I think that is a way to seriously explore how to get more influential. And that has to do with the marketing, as Will was mentioning, but this is another form of marketing from the inside out and the outside in. So thanks. I hope that was brief enough.
Chris, you're muted.
You're on mute.
Sorry. Thank you. Thank you, Wout. Henriette, I'm going to you. I'm not sure what you were planning to say, but hopefully moving on to some of the bigger questions you were asking in the chat around human rights, around stance against authoritarian government encroachment. But please go ahead.
I will. Thanks, Chris, and thanks everyone for your fantastic work. We could take one of these questions and have an hour-long session just on that. Now, I'm curious about how we are thinking about, I mean, the different papers touches on different sort of risks or different areas in internet governance that are very important. I think there's common concern about participation from the global south and from and also from different stakeholder groups. I'm curious though about how we deal with big tech, because I think that's one big shift in the human rights discourse. If you look at the very early documents on human rights, particularly the 2012 resolution of the Human Rights Council and the UNGA version of that, it's about states being duty bearers and having responsibility for ensuring rights are respected on the internet. And it's very clear, for example, that states who commit internet shutdowns are violating human rights. It's not very hard to argue that. You know, we don't always win that argument, but it's a very clear argument. I think what we see in the later text, and it's very much reflected in that 2023 General Assembly resolution that I posted the link to, is that looking at responsibility for upholding human rights in the digital space involves requirements or pressures, not just on states, but also on non-state actors, particularly on the private sector. And I've seen very little focus on that in the WSIS submissions. Aside from civil society organizations who've referenced specific rights language, I feel the technical community is kind of skirting the issue. You know, they talk about the importance of innovation and openness and interoperability, but they're not really looking at whether there are threats to that openness, not just from states, but also from corporations. So I'm just curious about that. Is it an issue because we don't understand it? Or is there a fear that if we call the private sector to be more accountable, we're undermining the multi-stakeholder approach? But why is it only civil society that's coming up with a position on this? Or maybe it doesn't belong in WSIS. And then just my other question, if there is time for that, is, you know, we're talking a lot about rights in the digital space, but we're also talking about the global rules-based order more broadly, particularly in terms of cybersecurity. And I'm just curious, do people think it's tactical to link WSIS to this, or is it perhaps tactical not to make WSIS too closely linked to these emerging and growing tensions around where different states stand with regard to the global rules-based order?
Thank you, Henriette. That certainly doesn't disappoint in being some very big questions. And I'm looking at whether anyone wants to put their hand up to answer either of those, or to reflect on some of the points that Henriette raised there, both in response to big tech and to the rules-based order. Paul, please, go ahead.
Thanks very much, and thanks so much for putting on this session. It's been really interesting so far. I just wanted to make a quick response to what Henriette said about human rights and businesses, because I think this is really an important topic. And in our response, the UK response to the Elements paper, we really pushed for a reference in the draft, the zero draft, to the UN guiding principles on business and human rights. Because I think those do make very clear responsibilities on businesses to avoid causing adverse human rights impacts and to address such impacts when they occur, And that brings in a whole load of different topics which are in the Elements paper, whether it's hate speech or other kinds of issues touching on human rights that we're dealing with. And I think having the UN Guiding Principles as a kind of key document which sets out the obligations which we would expect companies to follow would be a really good way to sort of approach that issue that Henriette raised. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Paul. Looking at any of the other technical community government who might like to weigh in on this? Will, please.
Thanks, Chris. Happy to dive into this these really important questions, and obviously, firstly, echo Paul's comments from the UK perspective. I think from our perspective, there's a couple of things going on here. One is how does WSIS support a free, open, secure, interoperable internet at a technical level? And then how do we start to address some of those really important content challenges? I think both go kind of to some extent hand in hand. What we hear a lot from governments, certainly in our region, is that those are the sorts of policy challenges that they're really grappling with. And they're wanting solutions to those sorts of policy challenges, including how to engage with industry, how to ensure that they get the balance right in their domestic regulation, what the supports are to support them in those endeavours, how industry can be a partner with government, with civil society, not a competitor. So I think there is a role for WSIS in that space. And I think to Henriette's second question, which kind of goes back to the diagram I hopefully was able to share earlier with the circle. If we are talking about WSIS as being this normative framework for digital governance and digital transformation, it has to be prepared to look at all aspects of that. But where I think it's important as a distinction is that by looking at all aspects, it doesn't have to be the answer to everything. It just has to provide the framework for those answers to emerge, and have different pillars that support different components of those sorts of really big and important questions. So I think this is one which is kind of a pillar of that whole WSIS vision of an information society. So I don't think we can avoid it. I think it would be positive to see in the WSIS framework and the WSIS+20 resolution. But I don't think, given the time between now and December, we're necessarily going to find the answers, but hopefully WSIS will set up a pathway for those answers to emerge.
Thanks very much, Will. I'd like to actually call on Nandini, both because I think the Global Digital Justice Forum documents have some quite relevant ideas on this, but also just in relation to what you were saying, Will, then about the framework, because I think the Global Digital Justice Forum documents are also, I think, unique in at least the 5 papers we're looking at today in discussing changes to an evolution of the action lines rather than sort of continuing with the same framework. So Nandini, please, if you've got any thoughts on that, great to hear.
Yes, so I would just like to flag 3 points from the Global Digital Justice Forum's positions on this. So the first is that we recognize that it's a very good starting point to say that all human rights offline must apply online. And since we are a group who's also very committed to gender equality and the issue of addressing technology-based violence, we do think this is important. At the same time, with increasing digital diffusion, we see that it's not as if there is life offline and there is life online, whether it is access to welfare, whether it's like issues of real life implications of surveillance, or whether it is access to economic, social, and cultural rights in the generative AI revolution. We feel that it's important to look at a technology life cycle approach where in the increasing set of outsourced subcontracting relationships that are there in data and AI value chains, how do you look at economic, social, and cultural rights guarantees become very important. And we think that within the WSIS, when we are discussing the question of ethics in the information society, it's very important to ground that in a human rights-based ethics framing. And then we have to look at what it means to realize it. And as Henriette said, if we have to respond effectively to big tech accountability, it becomes important to go for the strongest interpretation of the UN guiding principles on business and human rights, which means states' extraterritorial duty to hold their transnational corporations headquartered in their jurisdictions to account for their actions in other territories. That becomes critical. And this has already been upheld in the context of climate change and accountability for climate change impacting actions like of states' fossil fuels industry. And even in the digital, we need this principle translated.
All right. Thank you very much, Nandini, for that. And some really interesting discussions going on in the chat here as well. I see about the point about the potential for leaps in technology such as a quantum computer it can certainly serve to make even more extreme some of the trends that we're seeing. We have less than 15 minutes left. Amrita, I see your hand there, so please.
No, thank you, Chris. As in, we did have a question which we have been asking everywhere. And it is to all the panelists. Imagine, for example, the IGF or the WSIS receives a mandate. What is your vision? What would you like it to deliver by 2030? You could focus on the IGF, or if you could go broader to WSIS. To any of the speakers?
Well, maybe we can go through the speakers in the original order as well, just to give you a chance. So Poncelet, would you like to respond to that? Vision for
thank
IGF
you,
and WSIS.
Amrit. I think that is a very loaded question. But if I look at it from the perspective of what a lot of NRIs are thinking about, I think having an equity in terms of digital inclusiveness, especially bridging the digital divide, we still have a big gap there. And if we can achieve that, I mean, that would be a big milestone. I mean, it might be difficult, but it can be bridged. And that is where big tech comes into play, whereby they are seen as a solution rather than a problem, and it also deals with the part of transparency on actually how big tech looks at this model, not as a competitor, but as a solution to supporting the whole ecosystem. Thank you.
Thank you, Poncelet. Will, obviously, Australia already put a great deal of thought into the mechanics and modalities of the IGF going forward. But yeah, let your vision sort of how you'd like it to look 5 years from now.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I think we would love to see, as I said before, a real global cycle of conversation that's truly inclusive. We'd like to see that the resources are there not only to support participation, but also to support the implementation of outputs, so that we see not only conversation, but we see action out of that conversation. I think we'd like to see some really strong intersessional work, more so than we have now, that's taking forward those ideas and those concepts and developing them further. I think we would love to see the IGF continue to be and to continue to evolve as a core part of the global digital conversation, not just only on the internet governance conversation, but on the many issues that the IGF already covers, and for that to be recognized and to be taken forward. And then I think we would really like to see the involvement of all stakeholders in the process, even more so than they are now, not only contributing to the agenda and the conversation at the global IGF, but contributing to the work throughout the year, contributing to the promotion, the development, the execution, the support for countries, the support for others who may not be able to engage in the ways that we have and the mechanisms we have now, to really put the IGF at the center. By the time we hit its 25th anniversary, I think we would really love to see it move from kind of the startup to being that central phase, that central core component of the UN and the global digital conversation.
Brilliant, thank you. Nandini, please, would you be able to share some thoughts on IGF in 2030?
Yes, I also wanted to respond to the question on the WSIS, if I may. Yeah.
Please, yeah.
So I wanted to say that in 2005, we were not able to succeed in getting dedicated public financing for connectivity infrastructure. And we have learned the hard lessons of that 20 years later, so many people are still in an access trap. Though connectivity is increasing, there are people for whom connectivity will never reach because they don't make for a viable for-profit imperative as, investment for the market. So now, in order to avoid repeating this mistake when it comes to sharing equitable dividends of the data and AI revolution, since WSIS is the only forum we have to discuss financing for digital infrastructure development and actions like that, could we have a different outcome now compared to 20 years ago? I mean, this would be our vision at GDJF, the importance of public financing, in addition to all the other financing mechanisms that will in any case be explored. In relation to the IGF, as I think I already mentioned at the start, the one thing we would like to see is for meaningful multi-stakeholder dialogue, we need to ensure that we create the room within the IGF to ask hard questions and further conversations on accountability, because only that will be in line with the Net Mundial +10 vision on what is inclusive participation. So could we imagine a space for that? Because sometimes you have to have conversations where civil society needs space to be heard. So whether it's panel selection, whether it's the criteria we talk about as what passes for representational inclusivity, could we ensure that minority views that tend to be in the margins because they ask uncomfortable questions by speaking truth to power, can they be heard and centered?
Thank you very much. And yeah, the need for asking difficult questions in the IGF is absolutely something we've heard a bit in Norway at this year's IGF, of the need for that, and I think something that we do need to focus on. Isabelle, please.
Yes.
IGF and WSIS 5 years from now.
Thanks, Chris. Well, I think what I would like to see in 5 years is that the system really is delivering and working the best way. So that means that every single part of it is doing its best work and can actually address the different issues that we're addressing. I think it sort of complements a bit what all of the previous speakers have been saying, of working on digital divides or bringing or bridging all of these different issues. And in that, and specifically for the IGF, for it to be better interconnected with the rest of the system and be able to address the different challenges that we have in the digital world. So I think that would be my wish for in 5 years, that we can actually do the work on content and not just try to get the form right.
Excellent, thank you. And Desiree, last of the speakers, your vision for IGF and WSIS in 2030?
Well, primarily starting off with WSIS, I hope that by 2030, the IGF would remain a truly inclusive platform. And that means that all the stakeholders continue to meet on the equal footing and with strengthened participation from the Global South. Secondly, it would be really nice to have, by then, we would have a much stronger link between the the dialogue and action, the so-called IGF outputs from best practice forums and dynamic coalitions and PNI and so on, and NRIs, and all of these by 2030 should systematically be feeding into the UN system and processes, into national strategies and into regional policy frameworks. And then, of course, important thing, a stable institutional foundation, something that we mentioned earlier, with sustainable UN funding, but also keeping the voluntary base funding, and a clear governance model that includes ensuring this accountability we spoke earlier about, so that IGF could continue to safeguard and open and interoperable people-centered internet ecosystem in line with the agenda 2030 agenda. And if I may just add to the previous question that Henriette posed in the chat with regards to interoperability and private sector, I think there is a broad consensus that keeping the internet open and interoperable must remain a cornerstone of the WSIS+20 vision. And with that, I think what's necessary, I think many governments are saying that, including Australia, they underline these risks that may lead to fragmentation and by some state-driven authoritarian control. But I think it's equally important, to go back to Henriette's question, to recognize that the private sector behavior also shapes whether the internet remains a public resource, and that we have these digital commons. So the technical community like the RIPE NCC and other ensure that the internet's core architecture remains neutral, and that ensures technical coordination. At the same time, there's this growing recognition, as Switzerland noted in their paper with respect to information security, that the private sector needs to take on clear accountability, whether it's to sustainable digital goals, AI, energy hungry, whether in relation to platform governance, data stewardship, or protecting interoperability within their infrastructure levels. So I think that the Global Digital Compact has been a little bit more direct in framing this responsibility, and the WSIS+20 outcome could build on that as the GDC becomes part of this implementation map, and by reaffirming that the internet openness and interoperability are shared responsibilities. And that means for certain stakeholders maybe requiring restraint from certain governments, accountability from private sector, stewardship from the technical community, civil society guidelines in human rights, and so on. So I'll stop here. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much for that, Desiree, and and thank you for jumping in on the other question of Henriette's as well, because I think it's a really important point. I'm not going to try and summarize everything we've heard today. Thank you very much to the 5 speakers for taking us on a deeper dive into the non-papers. Everyone who joined, please have a look, and maybe we can even repaste in the chat here some of the links. Well, we'll send them out to the lists anyway, I'm sure, because great to actually read the papers in full and get even deeper into some of the points made here. There is obviously areas of consensus and agreement, certainly on the need to evolve the IGF and UN structures in diverse views on exactly how, on strengthening the NRIs. I think also, as was mentioned in the chat, the sort of focus on gender is a really important point, and also on human rights as sort of central to the WSIS process going forward. So there's a lot there to work on. We will have a 4th webinar in this series next Thursday on 28th of August at 1400 UTC. I don't have the list of speakers for that, but I'm sure we'll share that via mail on various lists. I think that's probably the last of these in this series of sessions, but who knows? I think we originally planned for 3 and now we're at 4, so it may continue indefinitely. But thank you all for joining. Thank you all for the input. Oh, and thank you, Amrita, for sharing the list of speakers for next week's session. Thank you all. Look forward to seeing you again next week. And until then, goodbye.
Bye, folks.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you for all.